Naruto says, I hear Red May came early thanks to a John Morgan fanfic. Well, yeah, Naruto, if you haven't been around, we have been doing John Morgan fanfiction for the last 2 days. We're not going to talk much about it today, but I do actually have something to say about this before we get started. Do you guys mind indulging me in a point of personal privilege? And I know after this, I'm going to let this topic go because now we've exhausted 3 days on the James Lindsay uproar over a fan fiction that John Morgan wrote. But I have something I want to say before we get started. And it actually relates back to Columbia. So it's not just out of left field. To catch everyone up to the last couple days, if you haven't been around, what happened is on Sunday in my supporter Discord at our regular weekly movie night that we've been doing for 2 goddamn years, we watched a movie called Midsummer. Midsummer, now Sam is getting a timeout. Midsummer is one of the greatest movies ever made. I think it's a horror movie. It's hard to watch at times, but I think it's a great movie and I was excited to share it with people. John Morgan, who is a college student that has been in my community for years, who is also a writer. He's very active in different writers groups. He's a very talented writer. He spent a couple hours writing a fan fiction that was inspired by the movie Midsummer, in which I was the star and in which James Lindsay got beaten with a whip until he admitted whiteness meant capitalism before he got burned alive as a human sacrifice, literally engulfed by the Gnostic sex cult. It's like a fucking allegory. James Lindsay literally got engulfed by the Gnostic sex cult to spread the good news to the world that whiteness means capitalism. It was funny. We had a good laugh. And then James Lindsay decided to retweet these psycho stalkers that have been stalking me for 4 years. Poetry Painter's been stalking me for 4 years. And James Lindsay decided to retweet Poetry Painter, who was complaining about this fan fiction, and accuse me of doing borderline devaluation. Which means he says I have a personality disorder. And all of this is because I retweeted a fan fiction that is hilarious. I read it the other day on the channel, so you can go back and listen to that. But all of this is because I retweeted a fan fiction that I didn't even write. And quite frankly, when I retweeted it, I hadn't even read it yet, and I didn't even know James Lindsay was in it. And that's the truth. I found out that James Lindsay was in this fanfiction when Poetry Painter started complaining about it on Twitter. I retweeted it to support John, who has been in my community for years and is generally a pretty good writer, and who put a nice picture of me on his fanfiction. That's why I retweeted it. And all of that led to me getting diagnosed by James Lindsay as having a fucking personality disorder in which I was devaluing him. We're going to talk more about that in a second. I can almost guarantee that wasn't the first fan fiction written about James Lindsay and likely won't be the last. Yeah, because guess what, guys? This is the internet. It's the way it goes. But I want to actually just talk about this for a second before we watch a clip that James Lindsay retweeted directly related to Columbia. Now, first of all, the crazy bitch who James Lindsay apparently thinks is completely mentally well has literally been complaining about this fan fiction for days now. Literally for days now. She's got this pinned to the top of her feed like half an hour ago, 41 minutes ago. She's still complaining about this fan fiction. The fan fiction came out on Monday. It's Wednesday. She's still complaining about the goddamn fan fiction. James Lindsay wants me to believe that this person is of sound mind. That's just silly, bro. That's just silly. And look at this. Like, they're having a whole back and forth conversation about, like, they've called John all sorts of names. They've been calling me names. They call all you guys names. They call all you guys flying monkeys. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I was thinking about this today. These people who claim to be anti-woke. They're the good anti-woke conservatives. These people have expended more energy complaining about a fan fiction than the leftists. That, like, when I go undercover at events and I go secretly to a leftist event or a socialist event and I secretly record them and I release their private presentations on the internet for everyone to see. The leftists who I secretly record and then put out there on the internet complain less about me secretly recording them and putting them on the internet than James Lindsay's fans do about the fact that a member of my community wrote a fan fiction. Let's just wrap our heads around that for a moment. And let us assess the state of James Lindsay's audience and the people that he's pandering to and catering to, because literally this has been going on all day on this bitch's feed. She's been tweeting other stuff too, but she constantly goes back to these conversations. If you go into her replies, and now of course it's not going to load because it's not going to do what I want it to do. Like, you scroll through this stuff, man, you can find Poetry Painter just having these massive backs and forths on this issue. And I guess it's not loading right now. Whatever. That's not what I want to show you. That's not what I want to show you either. And it's just like, the amount of people, and it's not even just her is the thing. I could pull up dozens of people who have been talking about this for days, all of whom are kissing James Lindsay's ass. And I'm sitting over here going, we literally watch socialism 6 days a week. We talk about the left 6 days a week. We go inside their private events. You guys never talk about that. We get them recorded saying the quiet part out loud. You guys never talk about that. James Lindsay never wanted to acknowledge that. But the minute that a member of my community, as a joke, as just a fun activity that, quite frankly, John Morgan never really expected people to read his fan fiction outside of my community because it was just a fun, lighthearted thing to do as an inside joke within my community. And the only reason that more people have read it outside of my community is that James Lindsay was complaining about it and retweeting psychos who stalk me on the internet. Otherwise, it would have just stayed as a private joke in my community and no one else would have seen it, because that's all it was. It was just a joke to have fun. Sometimes people have a sense of humor. I don't know why this is so hard to understand, but here's the bigger point that I want to make. And this actually is, I've been thinking about this for the last couple days. James's diagnosis of me. James has 500,000 followers on Twitter. James has publicly diagnosed me as having borderline personality disorder and devaluing him. What does that mean? In the context of borderline personality disorder, devaluation refers to a psychological defense mechanism or coping strategy that individuals with borderline personality disorder may employ in their interpersonal relationships. I haven't spoken to James Lindsay in over 3 years. Oh, actually, I take that back. The last time I spoke to James Lindsay was June of 2021. So almost, I'm sorry, we're going to be accurate about this. One of us has to be accurate. God knows James isn't doing it. I haven't spoken to James Lindsay since June of 2021. So I don't know how I have an interpersonal relationship with him at all. Devaluation involves a shift in a person's perception of others Well, yes, there certainly has been a shift where they view someone they previously idolized or held in high regard as unworthy, flawed, or worthless. People with borderline personality disorder often experience intense and unstable emotions and have difficulties with self image and struggling with maintaining stable relationships. The fact that I haven't spoken to James Lindsay in almost 3 years is evidence that I struggle to maintain stable relationships. I've spoken to James Lindsay like 3 times in my entire life. The pattern of devaluation typically follows a cycle known as splitting, where individuals with borderline personality disorder may initially idolize someone, believing they are perfect, amazing, and indispensable. I never believed James Lindsay was perfect, to be really, really clear. However, when conflicts or perceived flaws arise, the person with borderline personality disorder may rapidly shift to devaluing that individual and suddenly think they're entirely bad, evil, or undeserving of attention or affection. James Lindsay seems to have some sort of perception in his head that I owe him my admiration. Here's what I'm pissed off about. It is absolutely true, and I will never deny it and I will never take it back, that when I first woke up and I was first deep diving into trying to figure out what the left was back in 2020, James Lindsay was a huge inspiration for me. I do not take this back. In 2020, his work was awesome. In 2021, his work was awesome. His work prior to me waking up was pretty good. I wasn't as actively involved then. I haven't gone back and reverse engineered everything, but I had no problem with James Lindsay at all. In fact, I dedicated the entire last chapter of my book to him precisely because, and I don't actually take this back, I do believe that if everyone worked as hard as James Lindsay was working back then, we wouldn't have a problem right now. But James is confused because James seems to think that because he inspired me back then, that I am never allowed to evolve my position and I'm never allowed to change my mind and I'm never allowed to have a different perception of him other than worshiping at his goddamn feet. And I disagree. I was on board completely with him until he dove headfirst into the Gnosticism bullshit. And I was criticizing the Gnosticism bullshit the entire time. I said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't understand this. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, for years, for literally years, I was saying this. But I was also trying to be like, you know what? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, you have to overlook some things. Like, I played it so fucking even keeled with him for a long ass time. When James Lindsay started going after activists that I was working with. Like, I'm gonna give a real example. Justin O'Donnell. Justin O'Donnell is one of the most effective activists in the state of New Hampshire. And Justin O'Donnell can be a handful, but Justin O'Donnell is an extremely, extremely effective activist. Justin O'Donnell on Twitter one day was trying to tell James, the way that you're using the word groomer is exactly the same way that the left is using the word racist. And because you are overusing the term groomer to apply to every single person that you disagree with, the term groomer is now meaningless, just like the term racist is now meaningless because the left has overused it and made it meaningless. And these were two, like, I was watching them fight back and forth. James didn't want to hear this, even though Justin was absolutely correct in his evaluation. But James didn't want to hear this, had a massive fucking hissy fit on Twitter. Now I'm talking to, like, I'm friends with Justin. I'm in Justin's DM saying, can you please stop fucking antagonizing James Lindsay? I even went into James Lindsay's DMs. I was like, he is the most effective activist in New Hampshire. What the fuck are you doing? And I was like, why are you guys even fighting? This is so stupid. And then James blocked Justin, and Justin had a massive hissy fit because James fucking blocked him. And I was like, fuck you all. And stuff like that happens all the time. James Lindsay got into a massive back and forth with Corey DeAngelis. Now, James Lindsay doesn't like school choice, which is Corey DeAngelis' main thing. I'm not all on the school choice bandwagon in that I don't think the school choice is actually going to solve the problem. But Corey DeAngelis is really effective. And I appreciate what he's doing. And I think it is changing the cultural conversation about what public education is. And I think that's invaluable. James Lindsay goes after fucking Corey DeAngelis all the time. The two of them are fighting. And I was doing the same thing. People were like coming to me, be like, I cannot even tell you guys how often I'm asked about James Lindsay. I cannot tell you guys how many times people have come to me saying, Carla, what do you think? James Lindsay's acting crazy. He's acting crazy. He's acting crazy. And every single time for years, even when I agreed with them, that James was acting fucking crazy, I was like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just leave him alone. Just ignore it. Like, whatever. And I was like trying to keep the peace because I didn't want to be involved. Because the truth of the matter was that I stopped listening to James in the summer of 2021. I have barely listened to anything James has done in 3 years. But I hear about him all the fucking time. And people talk to me about him all the time. And for literally years, I was like trying to just like smooth things over, just not cause shit, just like me focus on my things. He can do whatever he's doing. And in the meantime, by the way, as I'm exposing all of this stuff, as I was exposing the Burlington School District, as I was exposing autistic sex education, as we were finding school district after school district after school district, putting all their stuff on the internet, as I was going undercover at events, as I was doing deep dives into far left socialism, I would always send James my stuff and James would never share it. And it got to the point with me with James we're talking about primary source video evidence. We're not talking about like, here's a video about me talking about my Substack. We're talking about primary source video evidence. James would never share it. Twice a year, maybe if I was lucky. And it got to the point with him where I was sending stuff to him literally just to say I did it. I stopped expecting James to do anything. I stopped expecting him to do anything at all. I stopped having the expectation that if I give James primary source video evidence that he can use to show people what the left is doing, he would at least share it out with his audience. I stopped having that expectation. And instead, the only reason that I would share stuff with him was to tell people I did it when he didn't share it. Because again, I would have people in my feed all the time, in my messages all the time. Are you working with James? Are you working with James? Does James know about this? Are you working with James? And I wanted to be able to tell people, I send James stuff all the time and James refuses to actually share it. So I don't know what you want me to do. And people in my comments all the time are like, why aren't you making peace with James? Why aren't you working with James? You guys should be working together. Fucking tell him that. Because I tried for years. I tried to keep the peace for years. I didn't say anything about him descending into Gnostic insanity. I have never been on my best behavior more than I was on my best behavior with fucking James Lindsay. And then I criticized Moms for Liberty and he blocked me on Twitter, which I was kind of like, honestly, I was so over it at that point that I was like, whatever. Like, I don't even care. I still hear everything he says because people tell me or they send me DMs or like whatever. It's not even that big of a deal. But where I decided that I am going to go at him directly because I do believe he is lying to people was when he started dragging members of my community on Twitter and telling people not only to block me, but to block members of my community. I was like, you know what? Go fuck yourself, James. My community members are like 8,000 times smarter than your audience. My community members are actually doing stuff out there with people. Your audience is reeing on Twitter. James Lindsay's audience, literally for fucking days, has been reeing on Twitter over a fan fiction. And James himself is diagnosing me with a personality disorder because I no longer idolize him, because I no longer put him on a pedestal, because I started telling the truth overtly about what he was doing, because we started correctly calling out the fact that James is lying to his audience. But all this means I have a personality disorder? James, I'm not the one out there lying to people. I'm not the one out there that's retweeting absolute psycho stalkers on the internet. I'm not the one telling people to block your audience. I have never once told people to block you or your audience. The fact of the matter is that if anyone goes into James Lindsay's replies and mentions me, they're going to get blocked. I've never told people to do that. And now James Lindsay is saying that I had some obligation to continue to idolize him after all the fucking covering up, after all of like the times I've been put in between him and other activists and I just tried to smooth things over. No. I have no fucking obligation to keep him on a pedestal just because that's where he likes to be. I have no fucking obligation to lie to people and say I support him when I no longer do. And it is some gall. It is some gall of him to insinuate that I have any obligation to do anything when James Lindsay has ignored my work for literally years. He has never really helped me. He has never supported what I'm doing. He came and talked to my community once. And by the way, I never really asked him to do stuff either because it was like I was doing my own thing. My thing was always separate. But let's not pretend that he's done me any favors, because he's never done me any favors. Let's not pretend that James has spent any time looking at what we've been doing for years at all, because he hasn't. Let's not pretend James actually cares about solving this problem and educating the public, because he doesn't. James has fucking lost it. And I think we can see that really clearly in his own tweets. Now, we're going to watch this little video before we get into the Columbia testimony, but this is just so fucking perfect. This is just so perfect. We're going to watch this video of a Columbia student. And I want to thank Nick Incognito for bringing this to my attention, because Nick is in the replies on this one. And this is the tweet that got Nick blocked by James Lindsay. This is the tweet. And then we've got Julie here. And Julie is someone that used to come into my community because she wanted me to support her in the documentary she was making. And other people can attest to this. Julie came into my private Zoom meetings and she wanted me to support her in the documentary that she was making. And then Julie started acting like a Christian authoritarian on Twitter. And I called her a Christian authoritarian on Twitter. And she didn't like that. And she had a massive hissy fit. And she said, "Why can't we legislate the Bible?" This bitch literally had an argument with me about like, why can't we legislate the Bible, Carlin? Why can't we legislate the Bible? Why can't we put the Bible back in schools? And I was like, why do you think I want your indoctrination in schools any more than I want leftist indoctrination in schools, Julie? Like, have I done something to make you believe that I think conservative indoctrination is acceptable? Because I don't. So Nick got into a back and forth with Julie. I know Carlin B is super fixated on needing people to explain the communist agenda in exactly the way she does. This is the typical talking point of the James Lindsay stans. Because the James Lindsay stans don't understand the left. They don't listen to the left. They don't watch the left. They don't understand the left. And James has done an absolutely shitty job of educating his audience. And this is the point. I've been doing these deep dives for over 3 years now. James has been doing this at least twice as long as me, if not longer. How is it possible? How is it possible that my audience knows more about what the left is doing than James and his audience. And this is where I say James is behaving grossly irresponsibly at best, and he's lying to people at worst. Because instead of actually listening to what leftists are saying, people like Julie, who just wanted to get famous for making a documentary about gender ideology and used to come into my community begging for my help in promoting her documentary about gender ideology, and used to slide into my emails begging for help about her fucking gender ideology documentary. And yeah, Julie, I can show the emails if I need to. Now Julie is like, I know that Carlin is super fixated on needing people to explain the communist agenda in exactly the same way she does. What does it matter? They hate capitalism. They hate America. They hate freedom. Like, literally, James Lindsay's audience is taking the... Do you guys remember after 9/11? After 9/11, do you guys remember when the conservatives after 9/11 were like, the Muslims attacked us because they hate our freedom? Julie is saying the same thing. Julie, James Lindsay stan, is saying, the leftists are attacking us because they hate our freedom. No, Julie. No, that's not why they're attacking you. And Nick correctly says, how do socialists define capitalism? And then Julie, James Lindsay stan, can't answer the question. Not one single member of James Lindsay's audience that doesn't also listen to me can answer the question about how the left defines capitalism. Her answer is, I guess the activists conflate everything oppressive and bourgeois, such as whiteness, heteronormativity, cisnormativity, etc., with capitalism. That's fine if she wants to point that out. I literally don't say that. But nice try, Julie. Thank you very much for letting us know that you have never actually listened to what I've said. It's fine for Carla to point that out. It's great. But it doesn't matter to most people. Most people have an emotional connection to preserving freedom than to preserving capitalism. And Reagan correctly says that capitalism is defined as private property ownership, Julie. Human Centipede says, I listened to James for years. The best I could get my kids to understand was SEL is bad. After 6 months here, my 10-year-old can fully explain the nuclear family in relation to the gender binary, and I bet that says social reproduction theory. Hang on. Social reproduction theory, private property, and the Marxist goals in education to overthrow capitalism. Julie, James Lindsay stan, cannot explain any of this. And that's because James has failed in his one and only job to teach people. But they want to make it about me. They always want to make it about me. They always want to make it as Carlin is forming a cult. Carlin just needs people to say the same thing she does. Otherwise, she blocks them from their community. No, Julie. No. The reason that my community members all say the same thing is because they literally sit here with me some 6 days a week and watch videos where the left is saying the same thing over and over and over again. And the idea that more people have an emotional connection to preserving freedom than to preserving capitalism. Julie, are you fucking stupid? I know the answer to that. Julie, that is ridiculous. Because Julie, James Lindsay stan, does not understand that how the left defines capitalism is freedom. Julie, the left defines capitalism as private property ownership. Private property ownership is specifically defined as your ability to own a home, your ability to own land, your ability to own a rental property, your ability to have intellectual property, your ability to own a business, your parental rights, and, wait for it, Julie, your individual liberties. You're telling me, Julie, best friends with James Lindsay, total James Lindsay stan? Julie, you're telling me that most people don't believe that individual liberties are freedom, because that is quite literally one of the things the left defines as private property under capitalism. You're telling me that most people can't rally around the idea of parental rights because parental rights is literally a form of private property under capitalism. You're telling me that most people can't wrap their heads around the idea that being able to buy a home, being able to buy land, being able to own a private business, those things all equate to freedom, because those are all under capitalism, Julie. And if you had spent more time listening to me rather than just begging for my help in promoting your gender ideology documentary so you could be famous on the internet and then go on a campaign to put the Bible back in schools and legislate your conservative Christian beliefs like the authoritarian cunt that you are, perhaps you would have understood that. But what I really want to do on this is I actually want to watch the clip that James posted before we get into the Colombia stuff. Actually, no, this is Colombia. This is Colombia. I want to listen to this clip so that you guys can hear what's going on at Colombia, and then we're going to talk about James's response.
I could never imagine the dean of the business school or the president of the university sitting here, without openly and listening to a conversation like this. This would seem too radical for them. How do we get them to see the truth?
I'm not a reformist. I don't believe in reform if that wasn't all. The system is purgatory, it's not reformatory. And I don't believe in representational politics. I am for land back. This is indigenous land. That means indigenous sovereignty needs to assert itself.
This is indigenous land and we want the land back. What does that sound like to people? And remember, this is what Julie was literally responding to on James Lindsay's timeline. What does that sound like to people? Does that sound like anything related to something we were just talking about?
Above all, I don't pledge allegiance to no American flag, let alone to no constitution. I don't call myself an American, and I've never called myself a Canadian. I may enjoy the privileges of a certain citizenship or so, but that is the difference between acknowledging privilege and complicity within the very land that I stand on. What is required is to center indigenous people in this struggle and anti-Black or Black struggles and deal with anti-Blackness within our community as well. The only people who are not settlers besides indigenous people are those who are descendants of the Middle Passage because they did not choose. We have anti-Blackness within our Muslim communities. We have queerphobia within our Muslim communities. In order to then counter, we need to develop an Islam of the oppressed. Where's the continuation of Malcolm's project? Where's the valuing of MLK's political theological arc? Yet we see this anti-spiritual animus because, again, the left has bought into the secular liberal discourse that masks its Christian ethos under rubric of some humanist, we're all equal, I'm colorblind, multicultural rhetoric. Well, I want to be seen for my color, and I want to be appreciated for that, as well as a hell of a lot of things having to do with my assemblage. But this introverted inferiority complex of wanting to assimilate into a white world, listen, the nonsense of decolonization is inherent.
Oh, decolonization. Decolonization. Oh, wow, look at that. That's about removing the oppressive force of capitalism.
The violent act. There's no undoing the violence. It's not just structural and systemic. The state is not some abstract entity that exists over and above us. We already govern one another vis-a-vis the set of capillary relations that we enact with one another right here, right now. You can walk out of the room if you want to. You can yell, you can scream, you can do whatever. You have agency. Power is already here. I have the power then to go organize with indigenous people at the center of that in my life. To go meet them, to go build with them. We're living in Lenni-Lenape territory in New York City, the largest contingent of indigenous people that live in any city. And yet how many people know indigenous people, let alone center indigenous struggles in their analysis? And center land back. That becomes the question. And that becomes the building premise. But that requires meeting on the land and building alternatives on the land. Because otherwise I'm touching and trying to reform the settler colonial order. I'm not going to spend time doing that.
Colonial order means capitalism. Order. That means capitalism.
We somehow see capitalism as an anathema of liberal.
What was that? What was that? What was that? We somehow see capitalism. They talked about the colonial order, which is another word for capitalism. They talked about white supremacy, which is another word for capitalism. And then they flat out say capitalism in the goddamn video that James Lindsay retweeted. Let's keep going, though.
Capitalism as an anathema of liberal modernity, yet we don't understand the basic plain fact that capitalism without the nation state would not survive. Don't they make sure?
Oh, what was that? They said capitalism again? Without capitalism, the nation state would not survive?
Short-term animosities, their long-term strategic interests are the same. The false binaries and the false choices.
The false binary?
How we expose anti-blackness within Zionist society. The sterilization of Ethiopian, Mizrahi, and Sephardic. And the white supremacy that animates Ashkenazi
capitalism
thought and discourse. Again, settler BIPOC traditions. Do we not have alternative forms of governance and economics and alternative ways of being, seeing, and conceiving of the world besides what the white man had us over? That becomes the question. So no, I'm not interested in reform. And the first thing that I do, as in any other place, is go and meet indigenous people, introduce myself. I'm XYZ and I'm a settler. And there's no shame, there's no guilt in that. But I'm tired of going to protests and essentially hearing people say, oh, Genocide Joe is not welcome here. This is our city, our city. It ain't your city. This is indigenous land. Again, and I'm going to continue to iterate. Just as much as if I was in Palestine, and I was a Jew, and I was an anti-Zionist, I would say, this is not my land. Either I leave, or I stand and fight, actually, with Palestinian people. I put my life on the line for indigenous people. Because that's what allyship is. The creation of alternatives, decolonized education, including an Islam of the oppressed. Again, you're not part of my ummah if you're queerphobic. If you don't acknowledge the fact that you're on settler colonial land. If you're sexist, if you're misogynist.
Protests at Columbia University over the crisis in the...
So, that was an entire 5-minute clip all about capitalism. Everyone understands that, right? I know my regular audience will understand that, but just in case anyone is new, that was an entire 5-minute clip that James Lindsay retweeted about capitalism. And what a wonderful opportunity for James Lindsay to do his one and only job, to teach people what the left is doing and what they're saying and what any of that means. What a golden opportunity for James Lindsay to be able to educate his audience about what's going on. What did he do instead? Stop hiring college graduates. And when we go into the replies and we see Nick is saying, James, this guy is a socialist and literally telling you that capitalism is the problem. Why aren't you telling this to your audience? James blocked Nick over this tweet. And then Julie, who spent months begging me to promote her documentary because she really wanted me to promote her documentary because she did a documentary about gender ideology called Beneath Sheep's Clothing, and she slid into my emails and came into my private meetings really begging me to help her promote her documentary. Julie then replies to Nick, who didn't say anything about me at all, saying, Carlin demands that everyone make this about capitalism, but most people don't care about capitalism. And then she can't even define capitalism, and she has no idea that how capitalism is directly related to preserving freedom. And she works directly with James. James was in Julie's documentary about gender ideology that Julie was sliding into my emails to try to get me to promote. James does nothing to teach his audience. His audience is in the comments complaining about the fact that I teach people that this is about capitalism. And James blocks people for trying to for saying, why aren't you explaining this is about capitalism? And then James declares to people that because I'm pointing this out correctly, that I have borderline personality disorder, and that I'm devaluing him for retweeting a fan fiction that someone in my community wrote for fun. I'm sorry, but I think it's a lot crazier that James has an opportunity to teach millions of people what is going on, that James is quite literally retweeting the material anyway, he's sharing the material anyway, and yet he does nothing to teach his audience what this is about, as evidenced by the fact that his audience has no fucking clue what they're talking about. No, James, I don't have any obligation to continue to cover this up. I have no obligation to continue to lie to people and send them to you when you're doing nothing to teach them, bro. I have no obligation to continue to kiss your ass. You've got plenty of people doing it. You certainly don't need me, because you've gone off the goddamn reservation, and what you're doing is actually detrimental to solving any problem. Stop hiring college graduates. That's how you're going to teach people what's going on. That's all I have to say about that.